Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss the 2010 movie The Wolfman, starring Benicio del Toro, Emily Blunt, Anthony Hopkins, and Hugo Weaving, directed by Joe Johnston. Now, before I get into this, I remember going to theaters for this, and I owned the DVD at one point, a long time ago. And at that point, I've I've seen the theatrical cut many times, but this will be like, I don't know, time number 3 when I did the unrated cut like this. Maybe it's my first time, I just don't remember. But I watched the theatrical first and then the unrated cut. So my point is, I'm gonna follow this through the unrated cut and I'll explain the differences. Let's get into the movie. Ben Talbot is outside looking for a creature until he gets killed by a half man, half wolf looking creature called a Wolfman. While in the unrated version, Lawrence Talbot, played by Benicio del Toro, is an actor on Broadway, as Gwen Conliffe, played by Emily Blunt, watches the show and meets Lawrence and tells him about Ben's disappearance, whereas in the unrated, while he's drunk, whereas in the theatrical cut, he meets her back at the Talbot mansion as she wrote him a letter about Ben's disappearance. As Lawrence takes the train back home to London and meets an elderly man whom I'm guessing is Max von Sydow, gives him his cane with a sword inside, and Lawrence comes off unlikable in not only the theatrical cut, but in the unrated cut, he's even more douchier, as well as, which is really sad because Benicio del Toro is a tremendous actor in general. But here he comes off very alienating as Lawrence Talbot, aka the Wolfman, as his mother died a long time ago, and I don't care for his arc whatsoever. Lawrence gets home and sees his father, Sir John Talbot, played by Anthony Hopkins, who's wasted in this movie as he comes off unlikable as well. And at this point, I don't like the main characters, as Gwen's character is poorly done by Emily Blunt, as she comes off from The Devil Wears Prada, which is where I primarily know her from, as Lawrence sees Ben's dead body as it looked skinned alive, which is a horribly disturbing scene, as Lawrence goes to a bar and hears about the gypsies, and they didn't kill Ben, is one of the gypsies says it's a werewolf. It was a werewolf, excuse me, and says his mother was a whore, and comes up to the table in a bar and throws a drink at a man's face and gets kicked out of the bar, and says to the asshole that his mother wasn't a whore. As someone realizes it's Lawrence Talbot, as he felt insulted, and has an awkward dinner scene with Gwen and John having dinner, as she reluctantly talks with Lawrence. She gets disgusted by the food, excuse me. And John comes off rather odd, and the extra scene in the bar, as well as the awkward dinner scene, was in the unrated cut. And these scenes are so bad in this movie. Has four great actors, and I'll get to the fourth one momentarily, as they felt wasted by this movie, as I've only introduced 3 thus far. We get to the scene where in the theatrical cut he introduces himself, and in the unrated cut he apologizes for his behavior at dinner earlier and wants to find the bastard who killed Ben. And in the unrated cut, Ben hears a noise and wakes Lawrence up as he goes outside and sees their mother is dead, and they get to daytime and have Ben's funeral as he's willing to find the killer. And Lawrence gets to Gypsy Village and talks with the Mileva until they get attacked, while the CGI looked very bad on a circus bear, for example, as the shots were dreadful, as this is a poorly made movie, and it felt like a missed opportunity with the great cast, as this movie was unfortunately executed poorly. Lawrence follows a kid while the Wolfman is in the forest and tries to hunt the Wolfman until it bites Lawrence, and people save Lawrence's life as Mileva stitches him back up, and she takes Lawrence back to the Talbot mansion with John as he sleeps for days and hears the Wolfman who attacked Lawrence in the previous scene, as John acts weird around Gwen while Dr. Lloyd visits Lawrence. And there was a callback to the 1941 movie along with Mileva as he checks Lawrence, and by definition I'm talking about Dr. Lloyd. As Lawrence, after waking up looking strange, John thanks Gwen for staying at the mansion, and the horror is not scary in this movie, despite it's supposed to be a monster movie from Universal Pictures. We first meet Inspector Aberline. There's the 4th actor, by the way, played by Hugo Weaving, and that's a great actor, number 4, but again, wasted by this movie, as he goes to the Talbot mansion, and talk with Lawrence while John doesn't want him inside the mansion, and Lawrence accepts the chat and Aberline, and it eventually has a chat with Aberline, and it eventually becomes unpleasant to the point he kicks him out of the mansion. And the next scene, Lawrence shows Gwen how to flick a rock to make it skip in the water until Lawrence hears some guys with guns as Dr. Lloyd comes there and almost captures Lawrence because he's cursed. And John shoots at them and threatens them they will be dead if they ever trespass on John's property ever again. And the editing between the theatrical cut and the unrated cut is dreadful and very fucking confusing. Lawrence tells Gwen to get out of the Talbot mansion because it's not safe anymore for her sakes, and he says if he hurt her, he would never forgive himself as he makes her move to London. And the score in this movie by Danny Elfman is not one of his best, in my opinion, while Aberline, questioned by Mrs. Kirk about why he's not looking at the Talbot mansion because they're cursed, as Lawrence goes outside and sees his mother, as they must have been in the unrated cut. And I was confused about what Lawrence was looking for, as he finds John and he tells Lawrence about how he loved his mother and tells him he is dead. And makes me think John must be the bad guy in this movie, because he said that while he traps Lawrence and has evil eyes and as he steps back, and this movie is becoming predictable at this point. Lawrence changes into the Wolfman and hunts and kills people by clawing at them, and the makeup by Rick Baker was actually very good, as that's the only compliment I'll give this movie at this point. And Aberline sees his troops dead as Lawrence wakes up the next day and has blood and ripped clothes all over him. And John says to Lawrence he's done terrible things, and Aberline captures Lawrence and takes him to the asylum, and the doctor comes off very alienating while torturing Lawrence, and who gives a shit? As he warns everyone about his father will kill again, and he visits Lawrence and confesses to him he killed his mother and Ben, and I knew that twist was coming, as it was so telegraphed it wasn't very funny. And director Joe Johnston should be ashamed of this movie for making it this as bad as he missed the boat by making a good movie at this point when it's not. John wants Lawrence, aka the Wolfman, to be killed or be killed as he leaves his jail room, and Lawrence will say he'll kill John, as Lawrence comes in as a volunteer as a test subject of an insane person, as Aberline happens to be there, and he says he'll kill the audience watching this presentation and tells them to kill him until the full moon changes. Lawrence changes Lawrence into a Wolfman and kills everyone in the audience except for Aberline, and throws the doctor out the window. And have a chase sequence between Aberline and the Wolfman as he rampages the city of London and kills people in town, including in a transportation of some kind as he escapes Aberline. And yes, this movie can be gory sometimes, which look rather fake. Daytime comes and the Wolfman becomes Lawrence again as he hears people are looking for him, and he visits Gwen at her store, and this is a callback to the 1941 movie, and he admits he's a monster. And so is John, as he tells her he killed Ben and his mother. And the acting in this scene was terrible, but hell, the acting in this whole movie was terrible. Anyway, so what the fuck is the point until Aberline comes to the door and sees Gwen as he lets her out and knows Lawrence is in the building as he ends up disappearing on them, and gets a shitload of newspapers out of a little boy's hand as he pays them with, which was pretty silly, as this, Jesus, I can't even go on about how bad this movie is. Gwen asks for Maleva so she can talk with her, and eventually Maleva goes to Gwen, and Gwen asks to cure Lawrence, and there's no chance he can be cured other than silver bullets. But she can't do it as she believes he's still there, while Lawrence is in the middle of the forest getting to the Talbot mansion, and Aberline goes to the bar and tells his deputies what to do with Lawrence, and at night sees Gwen is going to Lawrence and sends his deputies with him as Lawrence gets to the mansion at nighttime with a shotgun and looks for John so he can kill him off, but finds John playing the piano and beats up on Lawrence and shows him the full moon, as the dialogue in this scene was stupid and didn't come off believable. Both John and Lawrence turn into Wolfmen, and fight one another in the bloodiest way possible while the mansion is burning, as well as Gwen and Aberline are on the way to the house, and Lawrence wins the fight but by burning his father to death, as well as decapitates him and howls. As Gwen comes in and sees Lawrence as the Wolfman, and Aberline comes in and almost kills Lawrence as the Wolfman, but he bites Aberline and gets wounded. And he's wounded, but he goes outside to go after the Wolfman as Gwen hides from the Wolfman as he finds her on the edge of the river. And she tries to calm Lawrence down by making him remember her, and the authorities led by Aberline get closer, and the Wolfman reacts, and Gwen doesn't have a choice but to kill the Wolfman with a silver bullet and turns back into Lawrence, but Lawrence does die at this point as he thanked her for letting the Wolfman die, as Aberline and his deputies come in and seeing Lawrence is dead, and leads Aberline as the Wolfman in a sequel that'll never happen at this point, as this climax was terrible, was this film. But how terrible was this film? Let's get to it. I'll give this movie a 3.1 out of 10. I don't like the characters in this movie as they come off rather alienating, while they had a great cast from a couple of Oscar winners like Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins to Hugo Weaving and Emily Blunt, as she just came off of The Devil Wears Prada, and their characters have no arcs while the CGI looked horrible. But the makeup was very good, though. I'll give the movie that. The shots were dreadful, and the horror in this movie isn't very scary at all. And what horror is there in this movie, as this is supposed to be a monster movie from Universal Pictures. And there's not much of the monster, as he's barely in this movie. And the editing in both theatrical and the unrated cut was dreadful and fucking confusing. While the shots are dreadful, and the score wasn't the worst, but not one of Danny Elfman's best scores, in my opinion. The movie has an all-star cast, as this felt like a missed opportunity for a great movie, but the way it was executed was poorly done, and there were times the movie was predictable. So unfortunately, I don't have a choice but to give this a non-recommendation, because it missed the boat of being a good movie, because sadly, it's not a good movie, as it felt like a shame for director Joe Johnston to make a movie as bad as this. As this is a terrible film. Probably, we'll see about what we get there. So I would like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with the 2025 Wolfman movie that just came out this past weekend. And until then, woo!